Good afternoon. I am Rajesh Mangrulkar, and I'm the Marguerite S. Roll Professor of Medical Education and the new Center for the Director for the Michigan Center for Interprofessional Education, and I'm an Associate Professor in the medical school. I use he, him pronouns, and I am Indian with dark-rimmed glasses, bald on top with black and gray hair on the side. I'm currently dressed in a green checked button-down long sleeve shirt. My background is blurred at the moment, but the general hue is blue-green with the lamp over my right shoulder. I would like to personally welcome each and every one of you to this year's conference towards an anti-ableist academy, advancing inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility at the University of Michigan. Throughout this month of October, this conference includes 11 online sessions, each between 60 and 90 minutes, as part of Disability Community Month activities. These 11 sessions focus on the progress made and the tremendous amount of work still to be done on recommendations to close the accessibility gaps across campus for disabled students, faculty, and staff here at the University of Michigan. I was a member of the IDEA board, and my role in that group centered on influence and leadership in the academy to really design and implement policies that were far more inclusive and anti-ableist. I brought much of my experience in my previous 10 years as associate dean in the medical school, where during my time, we became a national leader in the recruitment of students with disabilities, both visible and invisible. Beyond recruitment, we engage students as collaborators on making the learning environment more welcome for those with disabilities. I am inspired by everyone I meet who cares about this movement. And in my new role in the Center for Interprofessional Education, I really hope to bring this lens to all health professional schools on our 3 campuses. I'm really pleased to welcome you to today's webinar. And to begin, we will start with assessing workplace culture through a disability lens session that's presented by Kirsten A. Elling, who goes by she, her pronouns. She is the coordinator for graduate student career advancement. Kirsten, I will turn things over to you.
Thank you so much for kicking us off. My name is Kirsten Elling, as you already know. I am a cisgender white woman with long brown hair mixed with a fair amount of gray and brown eyes. My pronouns are she, her. I'm wearing a black dress and gray sweater, and I've got a blue virtual background behind me with the Michigan logo. I'm a coordinator for Graduate Student Career Advancement, proud to be a part of the University Career Center team, and also embedded at the Rackham Graduate School, where I work with Michigan's amazing graduate students as they navigate the career development landscape. I am now going to pass to my colleague Liz to introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Schaller. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a recruitment coordinator at the University Career Center, working alongside Kirsten. I am a white cisgender female with dark brown hair. I am wearing a yellow shirt, and I do have a blurred background with hues of kind of a beige color. And I will pass it over to Danny Lakes, who is representing Procter & Gamble.
Hello, my name is Danny Lakes. I am a cisgender white man. Pronouns are he, him. I have long, wavy brown hair, and I'm wearing a blue striped shirt. And I am a robotic process automation specialist with P&G. And yeah, so I'll give it to the next person along here, which I think is Scott.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can hear my interpreter. Allow me to describe myself first. I am a white gentleman with bald, no hair on the top, some on the face, salt and pepper beard, more salt than pepper, if I can say that. The voice you're hearing is that of my sign language interpreter. Her name is Marky, and we both work together a lot at Procter & Gamble, where I work specifically. I'm a cybersecurity director, and I am thrilled to be here today to talk about my experience within P&G in regards to DE&I. So happy to answer all your questions. Thank you so much, and I'll pass it on over to the moderator.
My name is Claire. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a white woman with my light brown hair in a bun. I'm wearing a black hoodie, and behind me is a brown couch and some spider lights for Halloween. I actually just graduated from Michigan in 2020. I am working at P&G in IT, where I perform different automation services for customer teams like Kroger, Target, Meijer. And I am a member of the Me Too movement and was part of people with disabilities at Michigan when I was there due to a condition of PTSD. So I can send it back to Danny to talk about his experiences.
Actually, I think at this point, we're going to go back to myself. Kirsten Elling speaking again, and I'm gonna start sharing my screen. So give me 1 second while I do that, so we can get our slides up for everybody. And as you all know by now, our topic today is assessing organizational culture through a disability lens. We did already go through our introductions, but just want to show that slide up there in case you want to look for a moment at where people are and what their titles and names are. And then what I'd really like to kick us off with is to talk about our plans for our session today. We have big plans. We have a lot that we want to cover. But Liz and I are going to be going through some slides and talking about the impact and importance of organizational culture, as well as moving pretty quickly into some concrete strategies for assessing organizational culture during various stages that you would go through in terms of a job or internship search process. And then we'll be talking about that content till about 12:30 or so, and then we're going to turn it over to our colleagues from Procter & Gamble, where we will hear from Claire, Danny, and Scott about their experiences there. So that is our plan for today, and I think that I now am going to turn it over to Liz.
Yeah, this is Liz or Elizabeth speaking. I know I introduced myself both ways, so just to be clear there. And as Kirsten said, really just kind of diving into the different qualities and importance of assessing organizational culture. So these items that you all see in front of you are things that we know and have heard from other students. So really thinking about the company that you potentially are looking into, the alignment of values, the ability to succeed in the organization, career professional development and what that looks like, what that trajectory is, professional opportunities as well as advancement, salary, of course, ensuring equitable in that sense, well-being as well as productivity. And so we're going to shift to the next slide. I'm going to pass it back to Kirsten.
Thanks, Liz. This is Kirsten speaking again. So we wanted to start to dive into a little bit more specific information. And we've got here a list of characteristics of inclusive organizations, and credit to Betsy Irwin here at the University of Michigan, who did a workshop a couple of years ago on organization fit and culture that these are taken from. And so part of the idea here is that some of these characteristics are observable, and so there's ways to, we're going to talk through some of these, but there's a lot of things to consider. So commitment to community relationships, information sharing, how is that shared? Some of that might be visible, some of it you might have to live in the culture to fully know how that looks. Access to opportunity, a holistic view of employees. These are all characteristics that inclusive organizations really demonstrate. Alignment of culture and practice is another important piece. And just to drill down on that one a little bit, certainly there's things that people might, companies, organizations might put foreground as this is something that is part of our culture, but there's always the question of how does that live out? So an example I like to share is professional development, for example. So they may say, we really support the professional development and advancement of our employees. But what does that look like in practice? Does everyone have equal access to those kinds of opportunities? Or are there some that do and some that don't? Is it really clear for employees how do they access professional development? So that's an example, like, is what a company or organization says aligned with what it actually does and the lived experience of their employees. Collaborative conflict resolution process is an important thing to look for. Demonstrated diversity, and so certainly, some aspects of diversity are not maybe visible, but what efforts do they do to make the diversity of their organization visible? If you look at the website, if you drill down in terms of looking at the staff who occupy the roles, what do they look like? What are their backgrounds? What do they say about their backgrounds? All of that is really interesting and informative to look at. Is there accommodation for diverse abilities, and is that information easy to find? Is there a continuous learning mindset, and is there a culture of shared responsibility and accountability? So these are some of the characteristics of inclusive organizations that we want people to pay attention to, and we will be getting into a little bit later in our slide deck how you might go about assessing these characteristics throughout that job search and interview process. So I'm going to turn it back over to Liz now.
Great, thank you. So strategies for assessing organizational culture. So you'll see in this slide image that we have reflection and research listed within the pre-interview stage, and then during the interview as well as post-interview. So we're going to dive into each of these a little bit further. I know I personally value representation of my identity. I identify as a Latinx female, and so for me personally, that's important to make sure that the organization I'm working for has supports in place and has other folks that can resonate with me. And then when you proceed to the interview stages, you can dive into making connections, meeting other team members within the organization to, again, be able to verify and really dive into some of these pieces more. And then, of course, post-interview. So this would consist of evaluating and reflecting upon the offer. So looking at all the different components, not just salary, but all of the different components of the actual offer. And so we will continue on to dive into that pre-interview reflection phase, and I'm going to pass it over to Kirsten for that.
Thanks, Liz. And one thing, I know we've got some folks behind the scene helping out. So we do have a worksheet that we'd like to have put in the chat right now. This is something that will be a takeaway from this session where you can really think about the different phases and jot down notes for yourself. So if that could be put in the chat, we would appreciate that. So I have a couple slides on the pre-interview phase. And so I think that any time you're interviewing, there's a lot to reflect on and prepare for in terms of the interview. But one thing that is worth paying attention to is thinking about for yourself, how do you demonstrate your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in your research, your teaching, your service, your way of working with the team, other professional spaces. So I think that's a good thing to be thinking about as you head into an interview. And then as far as your own personal identities, which may include an intersection of different identities, I think it's really important to be clear, looking at any information that you've gathered about the organizational context and culture, and thinking about that and thinking about which of your identities you feel comfortable to disclose. Certainly some identities are more, more apparent visually. So I may not have a choice about disclosing that I'm a female, for example, but if I have another disability, or if I have a disability that's invisible, that might be something where I can choose. And so it's really good to be clear about that headed in, about what you want to disclose and what you don't want to disclose, what your rights are in those spaces. And just remember that if you're not comfortable sharing certain things about your identities, you have no obligation to share some of those social identities. But it also can be really helpful to talk, and we'll talk at the end about resources, but to talk about with a career counselor or other people about, okay, what am I going to disclose? What's my plan here? And what would be, and to be intentional, what are my reasons for disclosing? You can certainly discuss your commitments to DE&I without disclosing how your personal information or identities might intersect with your work in the DEI space. So those are a few things to think about. And then the other piece about the pre-interview phase is just to say a little bit more about the research that you can do. And so there's a lot of information that you can gain as you head into that interview phase by exploring the company website, looking at their mission, their values, their goals. Do they have a diversity statement? Looking at that About Us section, all of that can give you a lot of important information about the culture. The other tool that you have at your disposal is, places like LinkedIn or Handshake or Glassdoor or Rackham Connect, some of these networking platforms where perhaps you can find U of M alumni who actually work at these companies or organizations, and reach out to them and ask them for their lived experiences, their personal experiences of what it is like to work in this company and how this organization really lives out their diversity values. Salary information, as we talked about before, you can do research on that, and that can be interesting to see, equity pieces there. Looking at the demographics of the company, sometimes those are available, sometimes they're not, but also organizational structure, who's, if you can get an organizational chart, who's at the top, who's at the middle, who's at the lower levels. Are there any diversity affinity groups that are part of the organization? That can give you a real cue, whether they're present or not present. That tells you something. Recruitment strategies, are they reaching out to diverse groups? What are the strategies that the employer employs? And also, the job posting can be very telling. And I was actually working with a student just this week where we were looking at a job posting they were applying for. And in the job posting, it actually said, if you need accommodations as you're applying to this posting, please email us at access. And then the name of the company. And I was really glad to see that. And I was just thinking about what a powerful message that sends to anyone applying, that, wow, they're actually proactively asking if anyone needs an accommodation. And so that's a very strong signal about, the culture there. So I am going to advance and turn it back over to Liz.
Great. Thanks, Kirsten. So these next pieces are all going to be items that we are assessing, observing during the actual interview process. So we have to remember that interviewing is a two-way street. It's not just the company seeing that if the candidate's going to be a good fit, it's also our time for us to see if the organization is a good fit as well. So some things to consider are demographic composition of the interview team. So observing who's in the room with you. Is there representation of staff with disabilities? What does that look like? Things like Kirsten pointed out, are they proactive in some of those ways? Notice behaviors of interviewers during interactions. Observe look and feel of office. So asking, I know right now that there's a lot of remote interviewing going on. And so asking for a virtual tour of the office to be able to get a feel for that physical space. Questions that you are asked. So they are normally, of course, asking questions within the interview. Do they ask anything surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion? Are there any of their interviewing questions that are revolved around those pieces? And then, of course, any good interviewer is giving you a chance to ask questions at the end. This is something we always are coaching students to have prepared ahead of time, and definitely make sure to ask questions that are important to you. So really something that you can be prepared for. And then to the next slide, Kirsten, we are talking about post-interview. And so this is really just reflecting on the personal experience that you had during that interview, during that prior experience, and the offer. So how does this company invest in its employees? Do they highlight their efforts, to give back to the community? Was the office environment welcoming during your interview process? How did the staff treat you? Did you get a chance to engage, with multiple different people within the office? What professional development opportunities are available? Does the company offer designated rooms or provide accommodations? So some examples are ADA accessibility to buildings, assistive technology, prayer rooms, nursing rooms, obviously multiple other things that are going to come into play there. But definitely we don't want to assume students know that you have to ask for an accommodation. Are they, upcoming with that information? And so then thinking about follow-up questions and additional outreach to network. So those last two pieces there. So all of these things, again, after the interview that we're going to be reflecting. So I'm going to shift it back to Kirsten for some resources and questions.
Thanks, Liz. So this is Kirsten again. So we wanted to just, before we turn this over to our P&G colleagues, the panel that we're going to have with them, we wanted to just make sure that you knew about some resources available to you. So one thing, and this can, I think will be put in the chat in a moment, is that we do have a range of identity toolkits on the University Career Center website. And so we have a lot of identities represented in toolkits that are specific to various racial identities. For example, we also have a disability focused toolkit. So we did want to share the link to that. So that's something that's in the web, on our website. It's there for you to look at. I know we've gone over a lot of information. We're trying to cram it into a short amount of time here, but that's something that you can return to and look at your leisure. And then the other thing is something that I mentioned a little bit earlier, but it can be really helpful as you navigate, the job search, the internship search, and you have questions about, disclosure in terms of your disability status or any other questions really about the job search, but specifically about, identities and disability status issues. It can be very helpful to talk that through with a career counselor, a career coach. The advantage there is that, we've been through this process many times with many students, and so can leverage those experiences to really help you in your unique, pathway forward. So those are just a few resources. At this point, I am going to turn it over to, I believe Danny is the first panelist from P&G. So I'm going to continue to share my screen and navigate the slides for our panelists, but I will turn it over to Danny Lakes.
So, my name is Danny Lakes. As I said before, I'm 28 years old. I graduated from Miami University in 2014 with an associate's in computer science. I'm on the autism spectrum, and I'm a programmer by trade. Sometimes I program for a hobby too. I play a lot of video games, and I am an artist as well. I like to think of myself as creative minded. I put a lot of value on the freedom of the individual because of that. And that really heavily influenced the type of employer that I was looking for, because I wanted a company that not only encouraged the growth of the individual, but also accommodated all people and gave everyone a chance to develop and succeed. And one of the key things that I looked out for that showed me if a company truly cared about all that is if they valued the person over the employee. And I'm very proud to say, for me, P&G has been a very welcoming place in terms of that. But that's basically sort of what I looked for in a company, and just a little bit about me. And I think with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Scott here, who will tell you a little bit more about himself.
Okay. Make sure my camera's on, everybody can see me. Let me move it down a little bit. Okay, so Yeah, that was a great kickoff, Danny. Thank you so much. Hard to follow. That's a good act there. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of background first about myself, and then we can talk about what makes P&G attractive, if you will, what made me attracted to P&G and helped me realize that I think P&G is it, and they're the right company that I should, stay or have similar values that I have. So first, I graduated from Rochester Institute of Technology in 2002 with a bachelor's degree in IT. And that was a long time ago when IT was still a little bit immature. That time there were, 4 areas of study. We had web design and we had database, programming and networking, and that was it, right? So we did not have a lot of things like AI, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, a number of things. IoT environments, for example, robotics, all of that was not yet created. After I graduated in 2002, I ended up joining P&G, and I've been with P&G ever since, so almost 20 years. In my first 5 years at P&G, I decided to go to law school part-time while I worked full-time at P&G. My interest in law really helped combine my IT skills and my interests together. That led me to a different area called electronic discovery. That's where I worked in partnership with legal. I would go to court and testify if need be, and as well as become a little bit more involved in digital forensics. That led me to cybersecurity, and it's been a very fantastic journey thus far. On this picture on the slide, you might see a picture of my family. It's about a year old, but perfect timing because it has, the pumpkins. It was around October when we took this. So good Halloween shot there. I have 2 boys. They're both hearing. They all use sign language to communicate. Clark and Truman are their names. Now they are 9 and 6. You can also see the picture of my wife there. She's a sign language interpreter, and we actually met at P&G a long time ago when she was my interpreter. So that's one thing I owe P&G. All here, my second love, I guess. So Jewel is also here on the picture. That's my dog, and they always say it's Dad's dog, right? So she's mine. Nobody else really likes her except for me, and I like it that way. So I would also say I am deaf confident. So another thing that I describe myself as deaf confident. A lot of people don't realize this, but a lot of deaf people oftentimes describe themselves as culturally deaf. And what I mean by that is American Sign Language, it's our language, it's our native, it has its own rules and syntax, and there are over 250 different sign languages globally. We have American Sign Language that we use mostly here in the United States. There's also British Sign Language, French Sign Language, etc. Also, specifically related to P&G, what has helped me, and really my first moment of truth, if you will, when I arrived at P&G, I came for an all-day interview, and I told them, I need a sign language interpreter for this interview. And they said, okay, no problem. So when I arrived for the interview, they had forgotten to arrange the interpreter. And so that was my first red flag. I remember, we kind of had the awkward, what do we do now type of situation. And I luckily had brought my laptop with me. And so we had the interview via chatting, lip reading, and or typing back and forth. And it worked out well. No one in P&G kind of blinked. They just kind of went with the flow. There were a couple seconds of, interesting, what do we do, right? But after that, they went right with the flow. There was no questions asked on that side of things. And throughout the day, that was just one of the many different signs where I thought to myself, wow, this company is very proactive. They're very flexible. They're willing to, be open to new ideas and strategies for communication. And at the end of the day, it was a really nice experience. It wasn't important to necessarily work for just any employer. I wanted to be valued, and I felt valued. So I will pass it off to Claire.
Wow, Scott, you said it was going to be tough to follow Danny. Now I have to follow both of you. So great. So my name is Claire. My background has changed. My dog has joined behind me. So Scott, we have that in common. My dog only likes me. So we got that going. So I graduated from Michigan in 2020. I was in the School of Engineering, where I studied industrial and operations engineering. Fun fact, I was actually an athlete for 2 years, but my disability, post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, made it a little too difficult. That was too tough to navigate. Outside of work, I love to cook. I love messing around with different recipes. Love walking my dog and just exploring the outdoors. And I'll come back to this, but I'm a Me Too survivor. I'm an employee here with PTSD and living on with that. So moving on to the process of recruiting at P&G, I was a member of Students with Disabilities at Michigan, but I did not use it as a recruiting resource. Though when I got to interviews and filling out paperwork, it asks, do you have a disability? And I realized, yes, I do. So I'll be honest that I didn't use it in the research process. I wish I had, because when I came to P&G, I realized what my values were, and luckily P&G meets my values, but I hadn't planned ahead for that. But to backtrack a little bit of what I do at P&G, I work in IT, just like Danny and Scott. I am kind of an in-between of a data analyst and data scientist. I build tools and alter tools that currently are very time-consuming for different customer teams and make them run a lot faster and ideally automated to save them some time. So then going back to being a person with disabilities at Procter & Gamble. There is not really an established group or a knowledge base for what people can do with PTSD. It's kind of something that causes a gasp. People don't often talk about it. And so I came in looking for an affinity group. So I didn't just want to be a person with disabilities. I wanted to kind of come in with a mental health aspect of, hi, I suffer with this. I want to create a network to talk to people about this and how they navigate different triggers or flashbacks in the workplace. And when I asked around, there was nothing in place. And so I asked, I know I've been at the company less than 6 months at that point. Can I start that? And that was one thing that I really valued about P&G is, yes, at the moment, they didn't have that network that I was looking for, but they offered a new hire like me the opportunity to start that group. So I'm currently founding it to create a network for survivors of sexual assault, though, which is the primary focus, but it's there to help those who are struggling with the disabilities that come from it and how we can kind of navigate that in the workplace. So that's one thing I loved about P&G that I kind of wish I had known recruiting is, even as a new hire, which is what they call you if you're within a year at the company, that I could make a difference and not only help myself with my disability, but help others no matter what my tenure was. So I believe now we're moving forward into the panel and question and answers. Hopefully I'm right this time.
You are right, Claire. Thank you. Sorry, I just had to get my video going again. Thank you so much to Danny, Scott, and Claire for sharing a bit about your background and your process. I think I know from working with students that it's just so helpful to hear the stories of others who have navigated that path. And so, yeah, now is the time where we are going to open it up to questions. And there's already a couple of questions in the Q&A. So I'm actually going to read the question in case that's just helpful. And so I'm going to start with the most recent question that popped up. It's a long one, but I think important. What are panelists' thoughts on access and accommodations for people with mental health conditions? I sense there is still stigma. People do not always see these as medical conditions. It still feels like admitting to laziness, and this is what the person said, it still feels like admitting to laziness to say you just couldn't focus on anything to save your life or feel too glum to get out of bed. Also, accommodation, and as a clinical psychologist, I can just verify that is very much how people feel often. Also, accommodation for something like depression might be less straightforward than with other things where you can just provide a tool or click the right setting. Have you, to the panelists, seen models of access and accommodation for mental health and mental illness that felt especially innovative or effective?
I will open it up, of course, to Danny and Scott as well, but just to talk that mental health side. So similar to your question, I also, full disclosure, actually, I have 2 disabilities technically. I also have severe depression. And so there's no need to disclose that, but I kind of off the bat talking to my manager, just let them know, like, these are 2 things I live with, and it might impact my workplace performance, but that doesn't mean, make changes, and I'm working on it. So with that, I just kind of went forward with it. And that's also kind of why I'm starting that group, because it's easier, I think, kind of in the progression that people are starting to understand depression better, that if you say, hi, I'm having a depressive episode, I need some time. I have had a moment with that my manager allowed me to kind of go take some time for myself, come back, and then I was able to bounce back to work and catch up. On the PTSD side, I'm not sure yet, but we do have different management techniques, and I would like to think most managers are understanding if you are struggling with something like anxiety or depression. If you are having a moment or an episode that you need handled, or not handled, but understood, that is an offering that most managers can understand, as long as you're upfront with communication and managing that properly. If you have a meeting later that day, don't just not show up. Maybe if you can, send a quick email and say, hey, let's reschedule this meeting. You don't need to disclose your personal information, but you can kind of move forward with that. I hope that helped answer, but I can pass it on to Danny and Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. Those concrete suggestions, I think, are so helpful. So Danny, yeah, I think Danny and Scott both have their hands up. Danny, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I say I can start here. So, hand there. So for me, so I was actually hired through specifically a neurodiversity program with P&G. So they actually had done some research into people that are on the spectrum, what accommodations are needed, and even altered their interview process for our program, because they understood that people with autism don't interview in the traditional way, which often leads to people on the spectrum not getting the same sort of job opportunities that someone who is neurotypical would. So right off the bat, I felt, that there was the extra mile that they took to include people on the spectrum. So when I did get hired, there were also a couple extra things that they did for us. Number one, they actually asked us, like, how are fluorescent lights with you? Because that's also something with people on the spectrum. Sometimes too much fluorescent light, too much bright light can cause sensory overload. And luckily for my team, we weren't, that wasn't how autism presented itself for us. So we were pretty good there, but they were willing to actually redo the lights around our desks to accommodate that if needed. They got us all, each of us, a pair of noise canceling headphones to help block out noise, because there's a lot of chatter in the office, which can be very distracting for people on the spectrum. They even have a special, like a smaller room in the office that is kind of soundproofed, that they reserved just for our team. If any of us feel overwhelmed, need a quiet place to work, we can go there, just to make sure that we can keep getting our work done. And so it's a lot of little accommodations, but it all added up for me personally to feel like P&G really cared about our accommodations. So in my current job, I don't feel like there's as much of a stigma for my personal disability. because there are steps being taken to truly understand it. In previous jobs, I unfortunately can't say that, but that was in the past. Things are starting to change. So personally, I think I can understand and empathize with the feeling of your disability being a stigma, because that's how I felt for most of my life. But I think the key thing is finding a place that is attempting to understand. Maybe they don't fully understand yet, but as long as they are giving the attempt, that's going to, maybe you'll be the resource that puts them on the right track.
Thank you for that, Danny. I think your point too about what a range there is in terms of like companies that are really trying, and open to listening versus some that just aren't. And what you listed for some of the accommodations and the thinking at P&G just read sort of like a best practices list, which is really great to hear. Scott, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so what I was planning to say is I think that's a really great question that was asked. What I have seen so far in the last 20 years of my experience working here at P&G, I've seen positive change. For example, Procter & Gamble now, for the past several years, we've been talking a lot about what's called invisible disabilities. And so, there's more research that's demonstrating that there's really an overall umbrella of disabilities, and 20 to 30% are physical, but the rest are invisible. And so that could be inclusive of neurodiversity, mental illness, depression, etc., breast cancer, any and all of the above, ADHD, right? So in my several years of experience here, I've noticed how P&G has taken the lead to lead by example. And I do remember one person that worked under me previously, and she had severe OCD, and also was very extremely sensitive to the environment changing around her. She had like a special workstation as an accommodations with walls on each side. Sometimes she would ask to work a couple days from home before COVID, because she couldn't handle the fluorescent lights, as mentioned earlier. And P&G was very, very flexible to that, to figure out what we can do, how we can rearrange her schedule and make the workplace accommodable for her. So she's very intelligent. She has there's another individual that had Asperger's syndrome. And I just found it very interesting in several meetings that this person didn't like to speak up. They would type their responses in the chat window. And people are starting to realize now that, they see the chat window and they're making sure to take a pause, read what they are saying, and making sure that they're, being included in a part of the conversation and building onto that. So there are several other examples that I could give, but it's important to, as you're considering a company, whether they're the right fit for you, there are some sample questions that you can ask to provide some clues and get some ideas. For example, what does the work-life balance look like in your company? What do you expect as a company from your employees? Do you support remote working, hybrid working, etc.? What happens if an employee has a specific, use a specific use case example? What would happen if you had an employee in a certain situation and they might prefer to work in a different time zone or a different shift, if you will? Would you accommodate that? And so also ask your manager as well how they individually view work-life balance. For example, myself, every day, I always set aside an hour of my day, maybe a half an hour, to go to the gym. I go to the gym, I run, and I make sure that a priority. If I can't do that at noon, because I have a conflict of a meeting or what have you, I'll move it up to 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. If I have to, I will make it happen, and I will cancel a meeting. And I don't feel ashamed about it either. I can reschedule a meeting and say, I can't do this time, I apologize, let's reschedule, because I value my mental health. And I think that is important to myself and the company. And it reminds the people in senior leadership to say, you want your employees to succeed. If that is the case, you have to help me invest in my mental health too. So I think that there are different types of questions you can ask during your interview process with your future employers. And if they don't provide the responses that you're looking for, just save yourself a huge headache down the road. So, it might not be the right fit for you, and move on. There are many other really great companies out there that you can be a part of that value you.
Thank you, Scott, for sharing those examples. Again, I think it's so helpful for people to hear those examples, because it gives you the ideas about what's possible and what you might want to ask about. We have a lot of questions coming in, and I was really wanting to listen to everything that you were saying. So I wasn't reading them maybe as carefully as I needed to, the questions that were coming in, but I did notice there were a couple of questions about neurodiversity, and maybe I might group those together. So one question was, are there any recommended resources for workplaces looking to implement best practices for supporting neurodiversity? And then kind of a related question a little earlier in the queue was specifically directed at Danny. How do you handle the parts of business culture that are especially difficult for neurodivergent folks? For example, not picking up on nonverbal cues. So anything that people want to say to speak to either of those two related questions?
Say I can speak just real quick. I don't want to hog all the time here, but I will say that the program that I mentioned with P&G was sort of headed by a group of organizations. The first one being Specialist Sterna. They are a fantastic resource for people that are wanting to implement neurodiversity into their workplace, into hiring practices, anything like that. They are fantastic. They really help sort of, I can't think of a better term, but like bridge the gap, so to speak, between an organization that was trying to understand neurodiversity and neurodiverse individuals. And they really helped facilitate a lot of good communication between us and the organization that led to a lot of the things that I talked about in terms of accommodation. So that would be one resource. And then more locally around here, I know Easter Seals was another organization. And then we worked with the state disability organization. Again, it was like, at the local level. I think Specialist Sterna has done stuff internationally. I don't 100% know, don't quote me on that. But, it was, at the macro and micro levels that they really focused on that. In terms of the, there was another question, I'm blanking on it. Kirsten, can you remind me, please?
Let's see. It was about, let's see if we can get farther up on I don't know if I can see it anymore. It was about sort of like, I think specifically directed towards you, experiences about in meetings, some of the things that might be more difficult.
So, okay, so the business culture thing. Okay, so that one has been a tricky one for me. And the way that I've been able to handle it, thankfully, is I talked with my manager and said, hey, I don't get this stuff. Can you help me out? And so we've had conversations about it where I say, let's say this thing happens in a meeting, what's the proper way to respond? And we sort of like, go back and forth. I've just been very open with him and just honest about like what I don't understand. And then I've also on the flip side said, I am going to be very blunt and very honest. I don't necessarily, I sometimes sound rude when I'm talking about things, but it's not that I'm sounding rude. It's just I want to get to the point of everything. And luckily for me, within my organization, we call it straight talk, where it's just you get to the point, you don't sugarcoat it, you just say what the problem is. There's no blame involved. And thankfully, me and my team, we sort of have that group understanding that if we say this caused this problem, there's not necessarily blame on the person. It's more a blame on the action and how do we prevent it in the future. And so being able to, just have that kind of conversation really helps, and letting people know, hey, I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just very to the point. And essentially just being honest about who you are with people and letting them know really helps. I don't know if that helps answer the question, but that's how I've been able to navigate my workplace. So.
Yeah, a theme I'm hearing you, Claire, and Scott have all talked about different instances of communicating with, be it colleagues or a supervisor or, sort of at the committee level of an organization, like, here's an issue, how do we, address this? And maybe it's something more personal or maybe it's something more structural, but just how that communication and raising the issue is so important. And of course, you need trust, right, for that to happen in the first place. So I'm also just really impressed that there's a culture where all of you have found that very possible to do. And ultimately it's helping employees beyond even the individual employee who raises the point. There's a question for all panelists that I wanted to read. I don't know if we're going to have time to get to all the questions. They're really good ones coming in. So this question is, when serving on a hiring committee or recruiting for an employer, how can we best be transparent about the positives related to accessibility and disability culture at a workplace, and also the shortcomings? Any thoughts? Scott? Yeah.
Okay, so this is one, if you're on the hiring committee or during, there's an interview or panel, you don't realize how much power you have and how much influence you have, right? So a lot of the times you have to kind of convince people of the right thing. And I can tell you very personal stories of something that happened recently in the past summer, actually. So we were actually interviewing 2 deaf candidates. Anyways, long story short, I was told that both deaf candidates did not pass the interview. And there were 3 different scores that happened during the interview by 3 different people. The first candidate was well below the threshold, which was fine, no opposition there. The second candidate, if I remember correctly, I'm going to make up some numbers here, but the passing score is 21, okay? And the first interviewer gave them a 26, the second gave them a 24, and the third gave them a 20. And so that ended up meaning that the individual did not pass the interview. And I found that, I don't know why, but it just really bothered me. And so I also interviewed this person. They were very intelligent. I had to be a little bit sensitive because you can't go around telling people you made a mistake in not hiring this person, or, you have to respect the process, but at the same time, make sure that you have the power to influence the process, right? And so asking them to come to a meeting and say, what happened? Talk to me about what happened. And, getting feedback from those 3 interviewers. The first 2 said this person was great, very mature, gave the right answers, advocated for themselves, etc. And the third interviewer that gave the 20 score said, I don't think they have enough experience. And this is common with a lot of people with disabilities, right? Whether physical, invisible, whatever it might be, they're not given the same opportunities in their upbringings or professional or career experience as others. And that's what's called an unconscious bias. So from there, we can kind of explain what happened, how that seemed to be a negative or a detriment, if you will. And that individual that had given the person a 20, they were very intelligent. They're in AI and robotics. They graduated from MIT, right? So, just 2 different worlds that are converging. And so from there, maybe it's an internship position, not a full-time position. So the risk is low. If we were to hire this individual for an internship and they did not make the cut, then we didn't lose that much. But what if, hear me out, what if they were the right candidate that we were looking for and we missed that opportunity? And so that third person actually ended up changing their score from a 20 to a 21. And again, long story short, this individual that we hired as an intern exceeded expectations. And now they will be starting as a full-time employee in the summer at P&G. So that goes to show you have influence in your workplace. So speak up and let it be known.
Thank you so much for sharing that example. And again, I think just the reminding people of the power they have in certain situations is really important. I know there was a few more questions that we didn't get to. I'm told that any unanswered questions will be put in a Google Doc and panelists can respond to them later. And that's going to be in the shared folder that everyone has access to. But I want to be mindful that we do have a part 2 of the session, which is scheduled to start at 1. And so I need to transition it over to that group. I hope that you will all join me in thanking and applauding our panelists, Claire, Scott, and Danny, for so candidly sharing their experiences and their ideas. Liz, is there anything that you want to say before I turn it over?
You took care of it, Kirsten. Yes, thank you again, P&G team. We so much value the partnership that you had on this panel with us, and we hope that the audience found it helpful as well.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. And thanks to the audience for joining us today for our presentation and our wonderful panel. Please stick around for the next panel. I'd now like to welcome back Dr. Mangrulkar to introduce us to part 2 of today's webinar, which is the intentional recruitment of U of M students. So Raj, the floor is yours now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kirsten, and really thank you to all of our panelists for that incredible session. It was just so helpful to get advice from people on how to evaluate workplace culture, how to make it better. But it was I was just impressed by the honesty and authenticity of everyone. It takes a lot to share that, and so I just want to acknowledge how really great that was for all of us, and how grateful we are for sharing all of that with us. As we move forward in this really important and forward-thinking session, I'm now pleased to welcome you to the second part of our webinar and our panel, and it's called the Intentional Recruitment Session. And this is going to be presented by Paul Artali. Paul is the manager of our graduate student engagement in the Rackham Graduate School here at the University of Michigan. And he has assembled a wonderful panel to help us enlighten us about intentional recruitment in this space. Paul, I turn it over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Artali. I am the manager for graduate student engagement at the Rackham Graduate School. My pronouns are he and him. I am currently in my office with a Zoom background that is maize and with the University of Michigan logo in the corner. I am white, of Italian-American descent, and have short hair, and currently am wearing a blue University of Michigan Rackham golf shirt. And I would like to also mention that I was born with a limb difference, meaning that I am missing fingers on both of my hands and have short forearms. So I will show you on camera. This is what my son would call the Ninja Turtle hand. This is what my daughter would call the Lego hand. And that is me. I will now turn it over to Madeline to introduce herself.
Hi there, my name is Madeline Gustafson. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a sophomore in the College of Engineering here at the University of Michigan. I'm studying biomedical engineering. I also have cerebral palsy and am involved in adaptive sports here on campus. Behind me, you can see my dorm room and all of its wonderful glory. But yeah, I'm incredibly happy to speak on this panel today, and I will pass it over to Dr. Gay.
Thank you very much, Madeline. I'm Dr. Steve Gay, Pulmonary and Critical Care, Interim Associate Dean for Medical Student Education, previous Dean for Admissions for the last 15 years. I am African American. I am cisgendered. I identify as male. I have very short black hair. I wear very large horn-rimmed glasses, and I have a salt and pepper beard. My office is blurred behind me, but the predominant colors are white and pale blue, and I'm wearing a blue University of Michigan Division of Pulmonary and Critical Care, Fleece, as I speak to you today. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to Amy Whitesall.
Thank you, Steve. Did they turn me back on? All right, my name is Amy Whitesall. I am a cisgender white female. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I have shoulder length brown hair and blue eyes, and I'm wearing a gray sweater over a purple t-shirt. My background is an outdoor scene of a large fountain shooting water into the air, and I am a user experience and accessibility strategist in the communications and marketing department at Michigan Engineering. And with that, I'll pass it back to Paul to kick us off.
Thank you, Amy. So today we're talking about recruitment of students with disabilities at the University of Michigan. And I'm going to speak from my perspective as an administrator here at the University of going on 6 years now. But when we're talking about recruitment, there's one concept I think I like to frame recruitment from, whether it's students with disabilities or any and this probably comes from my background as a football coach, but there's what we call passive recruitment and active recruitment. And so passive recruitment is infrastructure or pieces that you don't have to do a lot to do. So a website is a good example of passive recruitment. And so active recruitment is recruitment where you as the recruiter are putting a focused effort into recruiting a specific type of person or demographic. And I like to frame it that way in discussing, recruitment here at the University of Michigan. How do we look at things from both a passive and active perspective? Because the reality is that you actually need both. You can't just rely on passive recruitment, and you can't just rely on active recruitment. You really need both to give you a really well-rounded, holistic perspective on recruitment. And so, some info about my microphone. I will try not to move. Hopefully that helps. And so when we're talking about accessibility, we're talking about recruitment, I think there's a lot of great things I'm seeing here at the University of Michigan from a passive recruitment standpoint. I think I see across campus a lot of departments and units doing great things to make their websites more accessible. They're building in closed caption into their videos. You're getting more. You get more links to ask if people need accommodations. I think we're doing a good job in doing that. I do think the effort around mental health and wellness, around neurodiversity and trying to understand it, providing better resources for students in those situations, I think is a lot better. And I think that is, I think that's something to be applauded. And I think that's something that definitely we have more room for improvement, but I do see this from a recruitment standpoint as great, because we have to think about from a passive recruitment standpoint that these are students who might be interested in coming to the University of Michigan and interact with things like our website. And are these mechanisms in place so that they can see that this is an inclusive place. This is a place that might include me. And I think that's a positive. I think, places in terms of the active, I think this is an area of growth at the university. I can't speak for every unit that does recruitment here, but I do think actively recruiting students with disabilities, whether that's talking with disability services at a high school or the equivalent at the university, if you're a graduate or a professional school, I think is definitely an area for continued growth. Forging partnerships with institutions like Gallaudet, which serves students who are deaf, I think are great partnerships to keep pursuing it and to go after. I do believe that there's some inroads to be made there. And I say that, I'm a big advocate for the active recruitment piece, is because if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 16% of students, 16% of individuals with disability go on to get at least a 4-year degree, and that's compared to 36% of those without a disability. So there's this disparity gap in educational attainment at the post-secondary level that I think we can help bridge that gap by doing more active recruitment of students with disabilities. And that's done through partnerships with other higher ed institutions, K-12, and other community organizations. And with that, I will turn it back over to Madeline to contribute to the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. With me coming to Michigan, it was definitely a factor to consider in how I would be treated as someone with a disability, because I came from a high school where it wasn't really talked about, and I was very much the only person there with a physical disability. But almost immediately within 2 weeks, I was able to get involved with a lot on campus, and that has been incredibly helpful for me to feel I have a support system, and there are so many phenomenal people I've met through adaptive sports and through SSD that I just feel like there's such a sense of community here. And that's something I'm so incredibly grateful for. But yeah, within my first 2 weeks of being here at Michigan, I managed to meet another student with cerebral palsy and get involved with track and field. And it's been absolutely phenomenal. But speaking on recruitment, I think it's absolutely necessary that resources like these are known to more students, and something that people like myself can know the minute they get to Michigan, rather than 2 weeks after the fact. Yeah, and continuing that discussion, I'll pass it to Dr. Gay.
Thank you very much, Madeline. For us here at the University of Michigan Medical School, the single and most important things for us are transparency. So everyone knows what we are trying to do and what we feel our role is as a medical school. Holistic evaluation and review of our students. We look at them as individuals. We look at them through the context of their journey and their success and the challenges that they have gone through during that journey. We believe in making great physicians who think and problem solve as physicians. Every single thing at this medical school is geared toward that. Our professional and technical standards are geared toward that. It isn't about what you can do physically. It isn't about the accommodations that you need. It is what we can do to help you to achieve those goals. How we evaluate you is based on those goals. We like to make this very clear, and at the same time run a process where you are certainly not admitted, or we make a decision not to admit you based on your diverse abilities. Quite the opposite. When we admit a student, it is only then that we hope that they will interact with us to determine, if any, what accommodations they will need to succeed and continue to succeed at the highest levels. We make that clear assessment and make absolutely clear what accommodations we have and can supply. And we want the students to then make decisions of where to go, where they will become the best physicians they can be and get every single amount of support that they need. We're always hopeful that we will be that institution. We work to aggressively recruit individuals of diverse ability because of what it does to the field of medicine and how it makes us better. We all clearly understand that an important part of patient care is the opportunity to be cared for by individuals who understand the context of your journey as a patient, who have had experiences, life experiences, emotional experiences, personal experiences that are similar to our own, so that we feel we can be adequately cared for and understood. In order to do this, it is our imperative as a medical school to make sure that we have diversity of all types that become great physicians from our medical school. With that, I'll turn it back over to Amy Whitesall.
Thank you, Dr. Gay. So in communications and marketing, in my world, we pay a lot of attention to the face that we're showing to the world. So that's kind of where we intersect with recruitment, is in those first impressions. And in our office in particular, we launched a new web design system just this last summer. And we're now in the process of refining that system. And part of the process is building inclusive user testing into our week-to-week iterations of the system. So every week or two, we do a round of user testing on some aspect of the site. Every round of user tester includes at least one user with a disability. And we've kind of done some grassroots recruiting, sent emails, posted flyers with a link to a Google sign-up form. So it's not particularly difficult or high tech. It just takes, a little bit of, it takes a little bit of commitment is what it takes. The tests are short. They're, a couple of tasks, 15 to 25 minutes, but we've had really good success using Zoom to have people screen share, and then we record the session and gather some really impactful information. User testing is always really informative. People interact with websites in all kinds of ways that the designers never envisioned. And so users with disabilities add to that general wealth of information. And really importantly, they can help us identify barriers that we might have inadvertently built into the website or into the system. So, we're definitely mindful of messaging, but we also want to make sure that the container that we put that message in is accessible. I have an example. I was told I could screen share. So I have an example of a snip from a user test. Let's see if I can run this for you. Okay. And what we have here is what you're going to see is a short video montage that is included in montages such as this are included in several of our pages. And I'm going to run a little bit of it, stop and explain, and then I will continue on. So here's the first part. And I would just say that this is running pretty much the way the designers intended and showed us in the office, on a high-speed connection. And the intention was to give some slice of life with these spliced together scenes from Michigan engineering. So this second piece of the video is a clip from a user test with a user who has ADHD. And they also had some technical difficulties, which kind of added to the impact of this experience. But you'll notice it transitions much more choppily. It's not loading smoothly. Things are flashing and jolting. And let me unshare for a second. Okay, that was not the experience we were going for. All that is to say that, when someone struggles like that to use one of our websites, and I would say that the feedback from the student who was doing the testing was, what's going on? This is confusing to me. It takes a lot of effort to figure out what's important here. Did I need to pay attention to that? the student kind of stalled at the top of that page. It excuse me, very clearly negatively affected their experience in a way that the design team never ever anticipated. And that, is the great benefit of when we learn a lot from user testing. Always, we learn a lot more when we're intentional about including people with disabilities. So I thank you for giving this your attention. And I'm not going to pass up the opportunity to invite people to get in touch with me if you want to be a volunteer tester, because there are people here. Get in touch. I'd be happy to share resources about how to institute something like this, and also happy to get your feedback, on our products. And from that, I think we're moving forward into the Q&A. Oh, yeah, sure. The second video, the video did not load very smoothly. The student who had ADHD was also stalled on that video. So in addition to the technical issues, what was loading there was confusing. So Dilip, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So as we continue with this portion, Amy, did you have something left?
No, nope.
Okay. It is our pleasure now to take questions. I'll be assisting Paul with the issues that he's having with his mic, but I'll rely on Paul's expertise to help me both interject and give adequate information that individuals might require. Are there any questions for us as the panel about our processes, our interactions, or how we work to put forth this effort? If there aren't, I can describe very briefly from the admission standpoint here at our medical school what we end up doing on a simple interview day. Our interview day, we call 24 hours in blue, and we have our students interact for the vast majority of the day, beginning the night before, meeting with other students. But before that, each and every student has the opportunity to interact with our support. The reason is that we now, as a part of the pandemic, have gone to a virtual process, and we want to make absolutely sure that if anyone needs any accommodations of any type, that they are being fulfilled appropriately. As you might expect in a virtual experience, these accommodations are broad and not simply secondary to various and diverse abilities. In many situations, there are accommodations that are required because of an individual's socioeconomic status, because of the quality and type of tech that they may have to participate. And our interviewers and everyone who participates in the process have been coached and advised in a very strong way never to judge individuals on those issues. But we also want to try to maximize both the experience and whatever support students need in order to best fulfill and show themselves in the best way possible for their interview. I'd like to ask Madeline a quick question if I could. Madeline, would you be so kind to describe to us your recruitment, if there was recruitment, here at the University of Michigan? How did the process work for you?
Yes, absolutely. So I was born and raised here in Michigan, and so coming to the U of M has always kind of been a goal of mine. It wasn't until I got to Michigan that I realized that all these resources were available to me. So my recruitment process was much more passive than I anticipated it being. But the minute I got involved, it was just a constant stream of support and guidance and resources that I didn't have in high school.
Thank you, Madeline. That's excellent. Another question from the audience, and we'll put this out to all the panelists, and whoever wishes to answer first is perfectly fine, but I think a couple of us should. What do you sense that the students are looking for as they evaluate different programs as it relates to services to support those with disabilities? I guess I can start. I think first and foremost, I think the students wish to be clearly understood and looked at as an individual. Very rarely are accommodations the same for anyone. I think we have to work very hard to tailor to the needs of each and every individual student, not just to simply allow them to survive here at Michigan, but to thrive here at Michigan, to show themselves and be their best selves, and to learn in the way that they wish. And so I think for us, we have noticed at the med school, a very individualized, concentrated effort to assist students to both know what has helped them to be successful, but to also see what the new challenges may be in the very specific realm of learning medicine is very important to assist them in feeling comfortable with their education and the process of their education going forward. We have to understand the unique step that those transitions create, and that in many cases, although certain accommodations may have allowed individuals to be successful, because it is a unique environment, because it is a new realm, a new area of study, that we should start from the beginning and make absolutely sure that we have looked at every parameter to work to assure the significant success of our students. Would anybody else like to answer, Paul?
Yeah, hopefully my microphone's better now. I think just a few quick bullets. I think number one, students are looking for representation. This goes back to my passive piece, but I think they're looking for representation on the website, representation if you're doing a visit day, and everything that comes with that, right? So representation. I think they're also looking for ease of navigation, both on the website and maybe when they're here, or maybe they're talking to a potential advisor, as I know in my doctoral program, that, you know, how do I get an accommodation? Who do I have to talk to? Like someone that can help navigate that. And I think examples of that, and I think it's the medical school that has a really good section on your website that I think everyone should have, where it's, here are the types of accommodations you can have, and here are some examples that have been done in the past, because that shows you that it's possible. And when it spans the range of different types of accommodations, you include more folks who might need them. So I think those are the pieces that I think our students are also looking for.
Amy, do you have any comments as we close?
Nothing in particular to that question. It's a little bit of a shift from my area.
Do you have any comments overall, however? I'll give you the last 2 minutes to close.
Oh, the last 2 minutes to close. Oh, my. Well, I'll get up on my chair and shout about giving people, putting technology in people's hands. If we're talking about websites in this particular case, as a recruitment tool, the standards that we have, the WCAG, the Section 508, we have boxes to check. You can check those boxes and say you're doing the right thing, but when you put the product, whatever it is, whether it's a website or a class, when you really tissue test it with real humans, that's when you find out if it works in real life. And just that, we have a lot to learn from each other. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Amy. Madeline, do you have any closing remarks for us?
Absolutely. I just want to speak on how necessary accommodation is as a student who receives accommodation, and also just how important it is to have an individualistic approach, and that's something I've appreciated in my time here, and I look forward to bringing it to more potential students.
Well said, Madeline. Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think number one, this is an evolving and ever-changing process, and to be flexible in your recruitment and in this journey as we're learning, as things change every day, accommodations, new technologies come out. So I think that flexibility is key. And I also, again, I think for this is more for units that are recruiting students to be more intentional about including the students with disabilities and targeting students with disabilities as a way to increase the diversity and the benefit to your respective program.
I think last in closing for me, and thank you, Paul, is what an honor and privilege it is to work with all of you here during this journey. One of my very intelligent students once told me, you know exactly what's important to an institution because they talk about it and show it. And when I see the incredible diversity of all types at this institution, but how it works for us, not just us working for it, how it makes us a better institution, a stronger institution, a more insightful institution, and a more intelligent one. I find it an honor and privilege to work every day with folks like all of you and others. And I'm exceptionally grateful to be at a place that constantly works to innovate and evolve in these ways to become better for our communities and society. So it's an honor and privilege to work alongside all of you each and every day. It's now 1:30. Thank you all very, very much for your time. Take care and be well.